I woke up to the sound of someone laughing. At first, I thought I was still dreaming. My head felt impossibly heavy, my tongue was dry, and every muscle in my body refused to move. Bright fluorescent lights burned through my closed eyelids while the steady rhythm of a heart monitor echoed somewhere beside me. The air smelled like antiseptic and freshly cleaned floors. A hospital. I tried opening my eyes, but instinct stopped me. The voices outside my room sounded far too comfortable, far too happy. "She'll probably sleep for another few hours," a woman said with complete confidence. I recognized the voice immediately. Beatrice, my mother-in-law. "Good," another woman replied with a laugh. "Tomorrow, everything will finally belong to us. Courtney, my sister-in-law." My heartbeat accelerated, but I forced myself to remain perfectly still. Years of negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts had taught me one priceless lesson. The person who speaks first usually loses. The person who listens learns everything. Beatrice chuckled softly. "Can you believe how easy this was? I honestly expected Melanie to put up more of a fight." Courtney laughed again. "She always thought she was the smartest person in the room." "Not anymore," Beatrice answered. "Tomorrow, Jason becomes acting CEO. The board signs the temporary authority papers, and by the time she realizes what's happening, she'll have already lost control of everything." I felt ice spreading through my chest. Acting CEO? Temporary authority? They weren't talking about helping me recover, they were talking about taking my company. Courtney lowered her voice. "Are you sure the doctor won't become a problem?" "He's already been taken care of," Beatrice replied calmly. "The paperwork says exhaustion, anxiety, and severe emotional instability, exactly what Harrison recommended." My mind immediately rejected what I had just heard. Harrison wasn't my attorney. Harrison was the name of my family's physician. "And the medication?" Courtney asked. "Will the blood work show anything?" Beatrice laughed again. "By tomorrow morning there won't be enough left in her system to prove anything. Besides, everyone already believes she's been under stress for months." My fingers twitched beneath the blanket, but I stopped myself before anyone noticed. "They drugged me. They had actually drugged me." Then another familiar voice entered the conversation. "Jason, my husband. Has she woken up?" he asked quietly. "Not yet," Beatrice answered. "Perfect." There wasn't a trace of concern in his voice. No fear, no guilt, only relief. "The lawyers are waiting for my call," Jason continued. "Once the doctors officially recommend extended observation, we'll activate the power of attorney. After that, the company is ours. Ours, not mine. Ours." 10 years of marriage collapsed into a single word. I wanted to jump out of bed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand an explanation. Instead, I remained completely motionless. Because another lesson from business echoed inside my mind. Never interrupt your enemy while they're revealing their entire strategy. Courtney spoke again. "I still can't believe she never suspected anything." Jason laughed quietly. "Why would she? Melanie always thought she could control every situation." "She trusted you," Beatrice said proudly. "Exactly," Jason answered. "That was her biggest mistake." Something inside me cracked, but it wasn't my heart. Hearts break. This was colder than that. It was the exact moment trust died. Images flooded my memory. Jason insisting I take a glass of wine during our anniversary dinner even after I said I wasn't feeling well. Jason smiling while telling me I worked too hard. Jason encouraging me to skip another board meeting because I looked exhausted. Jason offering me vitamins every morning before leaving for work. One memory after another suddenly looked different, like pieces of a puzzle finally locking into place. For months I had been unusually tired. My concentration had become inconsistent. I blamed stress, long hours, growing responsibilities. I never once imagined the man sleeping beside me every night might be the reason. "Tomorrow is going to be beautiful," Courtney said happily. "Melanie loses everything. Jason becomes CEO, and nobody even questions it." Beatrice sighed with satisfaction. "I've waited years for this family to finally have what it deserves." I almost laughed. Deserves. That word had followed me since the day I married into the Whitmore family. According to Beatrice, I didn't deserve Jason because I came from a middle-class family. I didn't deserve the penthouse because I earned it instead of inheriting it. I didn't deserve respect because I built my success before joining their family. In her mind, money only counted if it had existed for generations. Everything I created with my own hands somehow mattered less. "What about the shares?" Courtney asked. Jason answered immediately. "Once I have temporary authority, transferring management rights will be simple. Management rights, not ownership, an important difference." A difference Jason clearly didn't understand. That realization almost made me smile. Almost. Because there was something my husband had never cared enough to learn about the company he desperately wanted to control. Aegis Technologies wasn't built around money. It was built around intellectual property, encrypted infrastructure, and security systems that existed far beyond the walls of our headquarters. Most people thought our value came from corporate accounts. They were wrong. The real value lived somewhere else entirely. Somewhere only 3 people knew how to reach. And Jason wasn't one of them. Footsteps approached my bed. I felt someone standing close enough to hear my breathing. Jason. His voice became softer, almost affectionate. "Sleep while you still can, Melanie." Then I felt his hand gently brushing my hair away from my forehead. Anyone watching would have believed he was a devoted husband caring for his sick wife. I knew better now. "By tomorrow," he whispered, "everything you've spent 15 years building will belong to me." The door closed a few seconds later. Silence returned to the room. I waited another full minute before opening my eyes. White ceiling, IV line, heart monitor, hospital bracelet. Everything looked exactly as it should. Except, nothing was what it seemed anymore. Slowly, I turned my head toward the small table beside my bed. My handbag was gone. My phone was gone. My laptop was gone. They had removed every way I could contact the outside world. They believed I was trapped. They believed I was powerless. They believed I had no idea what they were planning. They were wrong about one very important thing. 23 minutes before I collapsed at dinner, I had sent one message that none of them knew existed. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the ceiling, replaying every word I had just heard. My heart was racing, but my mind felt strangely calm. Panic had never solved a problem in my life, and it wasn't about to start now. I carefully lifted one hand toward the IV taped to my arm. The fluid flowing into my vein looked clear, but I had no intention of leaving anything to chance. I pressed the call button beside my bed. Less than 30 seconds later, a young nurse stepped inside with a warm smile. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're awake. How are you feeling?" I forced myself to sound weak. "A little dizzy. Could I have some water?" She nodded and walked toward the sink. While her back was turned, I quietly reached beneath the hospital blanket and felt the inside seam of my robe. My fingertips found exactly what I was looking for. A paper-thin emergency phone no larger than a credit card. I never traveled without it. It had no social media, no banking apps, no personal contacts. Only 3 numbers existed inside its encrypted memory. My chief operating officer, my cybersecurity director, my attorney Daniel Harrison. Years earlier, after advising several Fortune 500 executives through corporate takeover attempts, Daniel insisted I always carry an independent emergency device that nobody knew about. I laughed at the idea back then. Now it might save my life. As soon as the nurse handed me the glass of water, I thanked her politely. "Has my husband been here?" I asked. "He was here earlier," she answered. "He seemed very worried about you." I almost smiled. Worried. Jason deserved an Academy Award. "The doctor should be back soon," she continued. "He wants to discuss a temporary treatment plan." Temporary treatment plan. Another phrase that sounded harmless until I remembered what I had overheard outside the room. I waited until she left before sliding the tiny phone into my hand beneath the blanket. The battery still showed 89%. More than enough. I typed one sentence using muscle memory alone. Code black. Activate contingency atlas. Do not contact my husband. Then I pressed send to all 3 contacts. Less than 15 seconds later, the screen vibrated. One reply. Daniel Harrison. Received. Stay calm. Say nothing. We're already moving. I stared at those 6 words until my breathing slowed. Good. That meant my emergency protocol was still intact. 3 years earlier, after my company survived a hostile acquisition attempt from an overseas competitor, Daniel convinced me to create a complete contingency system in case I was ever incapacitated. If Code Black was activated, every critical decision inside Aegis Technologies immediately required independent legal verification before becoming effective. Sensitive databases would become inaccessible. Major financial transfers would freeze. Certain executive permissions would automatically expire until my identity and mental capacity were independently confirmed. Only 4 people in the world knew the protocol existed. Jason wasn't one of them. I deleted the message history and slipped the phone back into its hiding place just as another knock sounded at the door. This time it wasn't a nurse. A middle-aged physician entered carrying a tablet. Jason followed closely behind him, wearing the perfect expression of a devoted husband exhausted by worry. He rushed toward my bedside and gently squeezed my hand. "Thank God you're awake," he whispered. His voice was flawless, concerned, loving, convincing. If I hadn't heard him 20 minutes earlier, I might have believed every word. The doctor smiled politely. "Mrs. Whitmore, you've been through a very stressful episode. We'd like to keep you under observation for another day or 2. I nodded slowly. "If you think that's best." Jason immediately looked relieved. "See? I told you she'd listen to reason." The doctor continued reading from his tablet. "Your husband mentioned you've been working extremely long hours and showing signs of emotional exhaustion for several months." I looked at Jason. He lowered his eyes with practiced sadness. "I was worried about you," he said quietly. "You've been forgetting meetings, skipping meals, losing focus." Every sentence had just enough truth to sound believable. I had missed meetings. I had felt exhausted. I had struggled to concentrate. "Because someone had been drugging me," the doctor continued. "Until you're fully recovered, we'd recommend allowing your husband to manage any significant business decisions." There it was, exactly as Beatrice had promised. They weren't trying to help me recover. They were building a legal foundation to remove me from my own company. Jason reached into a leather folder and placed several documents on the bedside table. "Don't worry," he said gently. "These are only temporary authorization forms. They'll let me keep things running while you get better." He pushed a pen toward me. "No pressure. Only if you're comfortable." I looked down at the signature line without touching the papers. Then I looked back at Jason. For 10 years, I had believed I knew this man's face better than anyone else's. Now I realized I had never known him at all. Behind the soft smile was calculation. Behind the reassuring voice was greed. Behind the wedding ring was betrayal. I slowly reached for the pen. Jason's eyes lit up for the briefest moment before he hid his excitement. Beatrice had been right. He thought he had already won. My fingers wrapped around the pen, but instead of signing, I looked directly into his eyes and gave him the same calm smile that had unsettled countless competitors across negotiating tables. "I'll sign them tomorrow," I whispered weakly. Relief washed across his face. "Of course," he answered immediately. "There's no rush." He leaned forward and kissed my forehead with perfect tenderness. "Just focus on getting better." As he stood to leave with the doctor, neither of them noticed the tiny security camera mounted above the hospital television. They also didn't know that Daniel Harrison had already filed an emergency petition with the court less than 10 minutes after receiving my message. By sunrise, the people who believed they were stealing my company would discover they had walked into a trap that had been quietly closing around them all night. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Jason's voice again. "By tomorrow, everything you've spent 15 years building will belong to me." 10 years of marriage had been reduced to one sentence. I should have been devastated. Instead, I felt strangely calm. The moment someone finally shows you who they really are, confusion disappears. All that's left is the truth. At 6:30 the next morning, a nurse entered my room carrying breakfast and another round of medication. I smiled politely and thanked her. The moment she stepped into the hallway, I slipped the pills into a folded napkin instead of swallowing them. I wasn't about to let anyone decide what entered my body again. 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated silently beneath the blanket. It was another encrypted message from Daniel Harrison. Board meeting delayed. Emergency protocol active. No executive authority can be transferred without independent capacity review. Remain cooperative. They still believe they're winning. I smiled for the first time since waking up. Daniel understood exactly how I thought. We had worked together for nearly 8 years, long before Jason ever became interested in the legal side of my company. Daniel wasn't just my attorney. He was one of the few people who knew every layer of Aegis Technologies. More importantly, he knew why I built those layers. Because success attracts ambition. Real success attracts predators. I learned that lesson years before I met Jason. I was 28 years old when I founded Aegis Technologies in a rented warehouse outside Seattle. Back then, it wasn't a billion-dollar cybersecurity company. It was just me, 2 software engineers, a borrowed server rack, and an idea that most investors laughed at. I believed cybersecurity wasn't about reacting after attacks happened. It was about preventing them before they ever began. Most venture capital firms called the idea unrealistic. One investor actually told me, companies don't buy protection they can't see. 3 years later, that same investor offered to buy my company for $20 million. I refused. Another 5 years passed. Government agencies became clients. Fortune 500 companies signed long-term contracts. Banks, hospitals, logistics firms, and aerospace manufacturers trusted our security systems with their most valuable information. By the time I turned 38, Aegis Technologies employed over 1,200 people across 4 states. Financial magazines called me one of the fastest-rising female CEOs in American technology. Jason loved telling people that story. He always skipped one important detail. I had already built almost everything before I married him. When we first met, Jason worked as a regional sales director for a luxury construction company. He was charming, confident, attentive, and unlike many men I dated, he never seemed intimidated by my success. At least that was what I believed. During our first year together, he constantly encouraged me to slow down. "You've already proven yourself," he used to say. "Life isn't only about work." At the time, those words sounded loving. Looking back, I realized they marked the beginning of something much darker. Every major decision after our wedding slowly shifted in his favor. He suggested hiring his cousin Courtney to help with public relations. I agreed. She lasted 6 months before quietly moving into a consulting position funded by my company. Then Beatrice convinced Jason that family should always come first. Suddenly, every holiday became mandatory. Every weekend belonged to his relatives. Every business success somehow turned into another opportunity for them to remind me I wasn't truly one of them. According to Beatrice, I had money but no class, success but no family legacy, intelligence but no social standing. She never insulted me directly when Jason was around. She was too smart for that. Instead, she used compliments that felt like tiny cuts. "It's wonderful that someone from your background accomplished so much," or "You must feel lucky Jason accepted such a demanding lifestyle." Jason never corrected her. At first I thought he simply wanted to avoid conflict. Now I knew better. Silence can be another form of agreement. About 3 years into our marriage, Jason became increasingly interested in the business. He asked to attend board dinners. He requested quarterly reports. He wanted introductions to investors. Eventually, he accepted a symbolic executive position that required very little responsibility but carried an impressive title. People assumed he helped build Aegis Technologies. I never corrected them. Looking back, perhaps that was my biggest mistake. Every lie grows stronger when good people stay quiet. The hospital door opened again. Jason walked in carrying fresh flowers and my favorite coffee from the cafe across the street. If anyone had taken a photograph at that moment, it would have looked like the perfect marriage. He kissed my forehead and smiled warmly. You look much better today. I returned a weak smile. I feel a little better. He placed the flowers on the windowsill before pulling a chair beside my bed. The board has been asking about you. I'm sure they have. Everyone's worried. Another lie. The board didn't panic. They followed procedures I personally designed years earlier. Jason crossed one leg over the other. The doctor still believes you need more rest. Really? Yes. He reached for my hand. I know it's difficult for someone like you to step away from work, but this might actually be good. I looked into his eyes. Good? He nodded sympathetically. You've carried too much responsibility for too long. Maybe this is the universe telling you it's time to let someone else help. Someone else. Meaning him. I almost admired his patience. He wasn't rushing anymore. Predators become very gentle once they believe the prey has nowhere left to run. How's the company? I asked quietly. Jason smiled. Everything's under control. Another lie. Daniel's message had already confirmed that nothing was under Jason's control. The board wants stability, he continued. They're considering appointing an interim CEO until you're healthy again. I pretended to look surprised. Who? Jason hesitated for exactly half a second before answering. They've asked me to help temporarily. I lowered my eyes as though processing the information. Inside, I almost laughed. Jason truly believed the board had chosen him. He had no idea every member of that board had signed confidentiality agreements preventing any executive transfer without my independent attorney present. Daniel had personally written those clauses after the hostile takeover attempt 3 years earlier. Jason never attended those meetings. He never read the final documents. He simply assumed marriage gave him access to everything I owned. That assumption was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. He squeezed my hand gently. Don't worry about anything. I'll take care of the company until you're back. I smiled softly. I know you will. Jason smiled back, completely satisfied. As he stood to leave, he had no idea I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is impulsive. What I was planning was something much simpler: accountability. And before this was over, every person who believed they could steal my life would learn the difference between controlling a company and understanding the woman who built it from nothing. By late morning, Jason returned to the hospital with Beatrice beside him. The moment they stepped into my room, I understood exactly how the next performance would unfold. Jason carried a leather folder pressed against his chest, like a man carrying something sacred. Beatrice wore a cream-colored designer suit, pearl earrings, and the kind of soft, sorrowful expression wealthy women practice for funerals and courtrooms. She moved toward my bed first, placing one cold hand over mine. My poor girl, she whispered, loud enough for the nurse near the doorway to hear. You have been through so much. I let my eyes drift slowly toward her face. I feel strange, I said weakly. Foggy. Beatrice gave Jason a meaningful look. It was quick, almost invisible, but I saw it. Approval. The drugs were still giving them exactly the story they wanted. Jason pulled a chair close to my bed and sat down with a heavy sigh. Melanie, we need to talk about something important. I blinked slowly. About what? He opened the leather folder and removed several documents, smoothing them carefully on the rolling tray beside my bed. Temporary protection papers, he said gently. Nothing permanent, nothing scary, just something to help me protect you while you're recovering. Beatrice leaned closer. You frightened us terribly at dinner, sweetheart. You were shaking. You could barely speak. Jason had to carry you to the car before the ambulance arrived. That was a lie. The paramedics came directly to the house. I remembered that much. But I kept my face empty, confused, frightened. I don't remember, I whispered. Jason immediately nodded. That's normal. The doctor said memory gaps can happen after a stress episode. He pushed the first page toward me. Your mind was overwhelmed. You said things at dinner that worried everyone. I looked at him. What did I say? His eyes softened with fake compassion. You said you couldn't do it anymore. Beatrice squeezed my hand. You begged Jason to take the company away from you before it destroyed your health. I let my lips part slightly, as if shocked by my own supposed confession. I said that? Jason nodded. You were crying, honey. You kept saying the pressure was too much. He reached into the folder and pulled out a pen. That's why we need to put this in writing while you're still calm. I stared at the pen. Not because I was afraid of signing. Because I knew exactly what he wanted. The first time Jason ever asked about my emergency succession plan was 8 months earlier. We had been sitting in the kitchen after a charity dinner, and he casually asked what would happen to Aegis Technologies if I became seriously ill. I told him the board would appoint an interim operating committee. He laughed and said that sounded cold. You're my wife, he told me. Shouldn't I have the final say? At the time I thought he was hurt. Now I understood. He was researching the locks before trying to break into the house. Beatrice reached into her handbag and removed reading glasses, placing them delicately on her nose. This document simply allows Jason to make financial and corporate decisions in your best interest. I looked at the heading, Durable Power of Attorney. Beneath it, in smaller legal language, were terms broad enough to give Jason access to bank accounts, corporate shares, real estate holdings, trust structures, insurance policies, tax filings, and medical records. It was not protection. It was a leash. Jason watched my face carefully. I know it looks intimidating, but it's standard. Daniel usually reviews things like this, I whispered. Jason's jaw tightened for only a second. Beatrice answered before he could. Daniel is part of the problem, dear. He has enabled this obsession with work for years. A proper attorney would have told you to slow down before you collapsed. I lowered my eyes. He takes care of the company. Jason gently lifted my chin with 2 fingers. I hated the touch, but I forced myself not to pull away. I take care of you. The room went quiet. The nurse had left. The door was almost closed. Beatrice stood near the foot of the bed like a guard. Jason leaned closer, dropping his voice into the soft register he used whenever he wanted obedience to feel like love. Melanie, listen to me carefully. If you fight this, people will think you're still unstable. There it was. Not a request. A warning. I don't want that for you, he continued. I don't want doctors questioning your mental state. I don't want the board hearing that you can't accept help. I don't want investors becoming nervous. Every sentence sounded gentle. Every sentence was a threat. I let tears fill my eyes. I don't want to lose everything. Jason smiled faintly, believing he had reached the weak spot. Then trust me. Beatrice stepped closer. Jason was born into a family that understands responsibility. He knows how to handle pressure. You built something impressive, Melanie. No one denies that. But building something and managing it at scale are 2 very different things. Sometimes strong women become strongest when they learn to step aside. I wanted to laugh in her face. Instead, I let 1 tear roll down my cheek. Maybe you're right. Jason's whole body relaxed. Beatrice's eyes brightened. They thought the surrender had begun. Jason turned the document to the signature page and placed the pen in my hand. Just sign here. My fingers closed around the pen. The room became very still. I could feel Jason holding his breath. I could feel Beatrice watching me like a hawk. The monitor beside my bed beeped steadily, each sound marking another second in the trap they believed they controlled. I lowered the pen toward the paper. Then I stopped. Jason's smile froze. What's wrong? I looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. What if I sign the wrong thing? My head still feels fuzzy. Beatrice exhaled sharply. Melanie, don't be difficult. Jason shot her a warning glance, then turned back to me. You're not being difficult, he said sweetly. You're scared. That's understandable. He pointed to the signature line. This is the only place you need to sign. I looked down again. My hand trembled on purpose. Will you stay with me after? Of course. Another lie. And you won't let them send me somewhere? Jason blinked. Somewhere? I let my voice break. Beatrice mentioned extended care last night when she thought I was asleep. For the first time, real panic flashed across his face. Beatrice stiffened. I had not revealed too much, just enough to make them wonder how much I knew. Jason recovered quickly. You must have misunderstood. Mother was talking about rest, maybe a wellness retreat. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept it. Okay. Then I signed. Not my full legal signature. Not the one used on banking documents, corporate resolutions, real estate filings, or trust authorizations. I signed the softer social version of my name, the version I used on birthday cards and hotel receipts, Melanie Whitmore. Legally recognizable to an amateur. Useless under the verification protocols Daniel had already activated. Jason didn't know that my binding corporate signature included a middle initial, a coded mark inside the M, and a biometric notarization requirement attached to any document involving Aegis Technologies. He saw ink on paper and believed he had won. Beatrice nearly smiled before catching herself. Jason took the document and dried the ink with ridiculous care. You did the right thing, he whispered. I leaned back against the pillow, letting exhaustion settle over my face. I'm so tired. Rest, Jason said, slipping the document into his folder. The adults will handle everything now. The adults. He had no idea how childish he sounded. Beatrice moved to the door and glanced into the hallway before looking back at Jason. We should file immediately, Jason nodded. I'll call the lawyers from the car. Then he returned to my bedside one last time and kissed my forehead. His lips felt cold. I'm proud of you, he said. The words almost made me sick. After they left, I counted slowly to 100 before moving. Then I slid my emergency phone from its hiding place and sent Daniel a second message. They have a signed decoy POA, social signature only. Beatrice mentioned extended care. Jason believes board transfer will proceed. His reply came faster than before. Good. Hospital toxicology secured. Court filing expanded. Let them submit the document. It will expose intent. I read the message twice. Let them submit it. That was the brilliance of Daniel's plan. If Jason merely possessed the document, he could claim confusion, pressure, concern. But if he filed it with the hospital, the board, the bank, or the court after being warned that my capacity was in question, he would create a paper trail proving premeditated exploitation. They needed my signature to steal from me. I needed them to use it. That afternoon, Jason visited twice more. Each time he played the devoted husband. Each time I played the broken wife. He told me the board was cooperating. He told me Beatrice had offered to stay at our house during my recovery. He told me Courtney was helping organize my closet and personal files. That last sentence nearly broke my act. My closet contained more than clothing. Hidden behind the jewelry wall was a biometric safe containing backup drives, trust certificates, and original intellectual property assignments. Courtney could tear apart every drawer in that room and still find nothing useful, but the thought of her hands on my things made my stomach twist. That's kind of her, I whispered. Jason smiled. Family takes care of family. I wondered if he heard how obscene that sounded. By sunset, the doctor came back with a new recommendation. More observation, limited outside contact, no work-related stress. Jason sat beside him, nodding solemnly through every word. The doctor never once looked me directly in the eyes for more than 2 seconds. That told me everything I needed to know. He was either incompetent or involved. Maybe both. When he asked whether I understood the treatment plan, I nodded like a frightened child. I just want to get better. Jason squeezed my shoulder. You will. After they left, darkness filled the hospital room. I lay awake listening to nurses moving in the hallway and wheels rolling across polished floors. Somewhere nearby, someone coughed. Somewhere farther away, a woman cried softly. Hospitals are strange places. Some people are fighting to live. Others are being taught how powerless they are supposed to feel. I looked toward the window where the Chicago skyline glowed faintly beyond the glass. Jason thought the signed document was the beginning of his control. Beatrice thought my silence meant weakness. Courtney thought she was about to inherit a lifestyle she had never earned. They had all mistaken performance for surrender. By morning, that document would reach the people Daniel wanted it to reach. By afternoon, they would believe every door had opened. And by the time they realized those doors only led deeper into the trap, it would already be too late to turn around. The following morning, I was discharged from the hospital just before 10 o'clock. Jason insisted on helping me into the passenger seat of his black Mercedes, as though I might collapse if I took one step without him. A nurse wished me a speedy recovery. The attending physician reminded me to avoid stress, business decisions, and unnecessary visitors. Jason thanked everyone with the gratitude of a devoted husband who had spent the night worrying about his sick wife. It was a flawless performance. If I hadn't overheard their conversation outside my hospital room, I would have believed every second of it. During the drive home, Jason kept one hand on the steering wheel and occasionally reached across the center console to squeeze my fingers. "The doctor says the next few weeks are important," he said gently. "You need complete rest." I looked out the passenger window. "I'm sorry I've been such a burden." He immediately shook his head. "Don't ever say that." Another perfect line. Another carefully rehearsed lie. The city passed by outside while my mind remained focused on one thing. The emergency phone hidden inside my robe vibrated once every hour with silent updates from Daniel Harrison. I never looked at the screen while Jason was watching. I didn't need to. Every vibration meant the contingency plan was continuing exactly as intended. 40 minutes later, we turned through the gates of our estate. The Whitmore residence looked exactly as it always had. White limestone walls, imported iron gates, perfect gardens, expensive sculptures placed with mathematical precision. For years, I believed this house represented success. Today, it looked like the world's most beautiful prison. Before the car even stopped, Beatrice stepped out onto the front porch with Courtney standing beside her. Both women smiled warmly as if welcoming home a recovering daughter. "There she is," Beatrice said happily. "Our brave girl." Courtney hurried forward and opened my door before Jason could. "Careful," she whispered. "Don't overdo it." I accepted her arm and allowed her to guide me toward the entrance. Every gesture felt exaggerated. Every smile lasted 1 second too long. They weren't taking care of me. They were watching a valuable investment they couldn't afford to lose before the paperwork was complete. As we entered the house, I immediately noticed something different. The security keypad beside the front door had been replaced. I stopped walking. "Did we change the alarm system?" Jason answered casually without looking at me. "The old one was acting up." That was strange. Our system had been installed by Aegis Technologies less than 2 years earlier. It had never malfunctioned once. "I don't remember approving that." Jason smiled. "You were busy." Another lie. Nothing involving home security happened without my authorization. Someone wanted control over who entered and left this house. The realization settled quietly into the back of my mind. Beatrice guided me into the living room, where herbal tea and fresh flowers waited on the coffee table. "Sit," she insisted. "You've done enough for one lifetime." Courtney laughed softly. "For once, let someone else take care of everything." I lowered myself onto the sofa while pretending to struggle with my balance. Jason watched me carefully. He wanted to believe the medication had weakened me. I intended to let him keep believing it. Beatrice handed me a teacup. "Drink this. It'll help you relax." I accepted the cup but only touched it to my lips. After hearing them discuss medication in the hospital, I wasn't swallowing anything I hadn't personally verified. Jason sat across from me. "There's one small thing we should discuss." Of course there was. "The board scheduled an emergency meeting this afternoon." I nodded slowly. "Without me?" "Only because they don't want to pressure you." He smiled sympathetically. "I'll represent your interests." My interests. I almost admired his confidence. Daniel's emergency protocol required any interim executive appointment to receive legal validation from my independent counsel before becoming effective. Jason believed the signed document from the hospital changed everything. He had no idea it changed almost nothing. "Will you tell them I'll be back soon?" I asked quietly. Jason reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "Don't think about work anymore," Courtney interrupted. "Actually, I already packed away your office files so you won't be tempted." I turned toward her. "You went into my office?" She smiled proudly. Just helping. Helping herself, more likely. My home office contained little of real value because I never stored confidential material there, but Courtney didn't know that. She probably imagined she would discover passwords, contracts, or account information hidden inside desk drawers. If only she knew how boring those drawers actually were. Beatrice stood. "You should lie down." She looked toward Jason. "Show her the bedroom." As we climbed the stairs, something else caught my attention. A small black dome had appeared near the hallway ceiling. Another camera. We already had cameras throughout the property, but this model was different. Commercial grade. Recently installed. Jason noticed me looking. "Extra security." I nodded. "Makes sense." It made perfect sense if your goal was monitoring someone inside the house. Our bedroom looked unchanged, except for one detail. My laptop was gone. The charging dock on the desk sat empty. So did the shelf where I kept 2 encrypted backup drives. I walked toward the desk. "Where are my things?" Jason answered immediately. "I locked everything away." "Why?" "Because work is your addiction." He smiled as though saying something loving. "The doctor agreed you shouldn't have access to business until you're healthy." There it was again. They weren't protecting me from stress. They were separating me from communication. "Can I at least have my phone?" Jason hesitated. "Maybe tomorrow." Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. Tomorrow the board meeting would happen. Tomorrow temporary authority would supposedly become permanent. Tomorrow they expected complete control. "I understand," I whispered. Jason kissed my forehead again before leaving the room. "Get some sleep." The bedroom door clicked shut. I waited exactly 3 minutes before standing. My balance was perfectly fine. I crossed the room and quietly opened the walk-in closet. Everything looked normal until I reached the back wall, where a full-length mirror covered what appeared to be ordinary shelving. I pressed my thumb against a tiny metal screw beneath the frame. Nothing happened. Of course not. Jason had disabled the visible security system. He hadn't disabled the hidden one. I pressed a second pressure point concealed beneath the wooden trim. A nearly silent click echoed inside the wall. The mirror shifted half an inch. I smiled. Good. They hadn't found it. Behind the mirror sat a narrow compartment no larger than a suitcase. Inside rested another encrypted phone, a biometric flash drive, several legal documents, and a compact tablet connected directly to Aegis Technologies' private satellite network. I powered on the tablet. Within seconds, the secure dashboard appeared. Daniel had already left 3 priority messages. Emergency injunction filed. Temporary authority challenged. Independent toxicology ordered. Do not reveal access. Beneath those messages sat a live security feed from Aegis headquarters. Everything looked normal. Employees worked. Executives moved through hallways. Business continued exactly as planned. Jason wasn't running my company. He wasn't even inside the building. Then another icon flashed across the screen. Home network. Curious, I opened it. 4 new camera feeds appeared. Front entrance, kitchen, living room, study. Not the cameras Jason installed. Mine. Hidden cameras I ordered installed 6 months earlier after noticing small but unexplained changes inside the house. Missing paperwork. Rearranged drawers. Personal conversations repeated by people who shouldn't have known them. At the time, I thought I was becoming paranoid. Now I understood my instincts had been trying to protect me. I selected the living room feed. Jason, Beatrice, and Courtney were sitting together around the coffee table. Jason removed the signed power of attorney from his briefcase and laid it proudly on the table. Courtney clapped her hands. She actually signed it. Beatrice smiled with unmistakable satisfaction. I told you she would. Once people believe they're broken, they'll accept almost anything. Jason laughed quietly. By this time tomorrow, she'll own nothing except the bedroom upstairs. Beatrice picked up her champagne glass and raised it into the air. To new beginnings. Courtney lifted hers. To finally getting what should have been ours. Jason joined the toast without hesitation. 3 crystal glasses touched together. I watched the screen in complete silence. Then I reached for the record button built into the security software. Every word, every smile, every confession, every celebration. They thought they were celebrating the perfect crime. They had no idea they had just created the first piece of evidence that would eventually destroy every one of them. The moment I finished recording their celebration, I locked the tablet, returned it to the hidden compartment, and carefully slid the mirror back into place. By the time Jason knocked on the bedroom door 5 minutes later, I was already lying in bed with the blanket pulled to my chest, pretending I had been asleep the entire time. He opened the door quietly and smiled when he saw me rubbing my eyes. "Sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to wake you." I forced a tired smile. I wasn't sleeping very deeply. He walked over carrying another glass of water and 2 white pills resting in the palm of his hand. "The doctor wants you to stay ahead of the headaches." I looked at the pills without reaching for them. "Do I really need more medication?" Jason sat beside me on the edge of the bed. "Melanie, you're exhausted. You collapsed. You barely remember what happened. Let us take care of you for a little while." His voice was warm, patient, almost comforting. If someone had walked into the room at that exact moment, they would have believed they were witnessing the perfect husband caring for his recovering wife. They never would have guessed the same man had celebrated stealing her company less than 10 minutes earlier. I accepted the pills and placed them on my tongue before taking a sip of water. Jason watched carefully until I swallowed. He kissed my forehead, smiled with satisfaction, and left the room. The second the door closed, I hurried into the bathroom, leaned over the sink, and spat both pills into a tissue. I unfolded the paper slowly. No markings. White capsules. They could have been vitamins. They could have been harmless sedatives. Or they could have been exactly what Beatrice discussed in the hospital. I wasn't taking another chance. I wrapped them carefully inside a clean tissue and hid them inside an empty cosmetic container. Daniel would want them tested. Every piece of evidence mattered now. When I returned to the bedroom, I heard the unmistakable sound of a lock clicking from outside the door. I stood perfectly still. Then I walked over and tried the handle. It didn't move. I wasn't imagining it. They had locked me inside my own bedroom. I looked around the room with new eyes. My laptop was gone. My phone was gone. The landline had disappeared from the nightstand. Even the television remote was missing. My wardrobe had been reorganized. Half of my business suits were gone, replaced by pajamas, robes, and casual clothes. Someone wasn't preparing for my recovery. Someone was preparing for my captivity. I walked to the window. The gardens stretched across several acres, beautiful as always, but something caught my attention immediately. A black SUV sat just beyond the main gate. 2 men wearing dark security uniforms stood nearby, pretending to inspect the property. I had never hired them. Jason had. They weren't protecting the house. They were protecting the plan. Another vibration echoed softly from inside the hidden compartment. I reopened the mirror and retrieved the emergency phone. Daniel had sent another secure message. Private investigator confirms hospital physician received unexplained payments through shell consulting firm connected to Whitmore Family Holdings. Financial Crimes Unit notified. Do not confront anyone yet. Continue gathering evidence. I smiled faintly. That explained the doctor's behavior. This wasn't incompetence. It was corruption. Another message arrived almost immediately from my chief operating officer, Emily Chen. Jason arrived at headquarters. Attempted to access executive systems. Security protocols denied elevated privileges. He believes it's a temporary software issue. I could almost picture Jason standing in my executive office pretending to remain calm while every system quietly rejected him. He probably thought the IT department had made a mistake. He had no idea the company itself no longer trusted him. I typed a short reply. Maintain normal operations. Treat Jason respectfully. Record every instruction he gives. Emily responded within seconds. Already happening. Everyone believes he's making his own case against himself. Exactly. Sometimes the fastest way to expose someone isn't to stop them, it's to let them keep talking. I returned the phone to its hiding place just as footsteps approached the bedroom. This time it wasn't Jason. Beatrice unlocked the door and entered carrying a tray with soup, crackers, and herbal tea. "Lunch," she announced cheerfully. I sat up slowly. You didn't have to do this. She smiled. Family takes care of family. I almost laughed at how often they repeated that sentence. It sounded less like love and more like a corporate slogan. She placed the tray on my lap before looking around the room. I hope you're not feeling restless. A little. Good. She caught herself immediately. I mean, that's normal. I watched her carefully. She recovered quickly. The doctor said boredom is actually part of healing. Your mind needs to slow down. Can I walk outside later? Her answer came too quickly. Not today. Tomorrow? We'll see. I looked toward the window. Fresh air usually helps me think. Beatrice smiled politely, but the warmth never reached her eyes. Right now, thinking is exactly what we're trying to reduce. The sentence hung in the room longer than she intended. Even she realized how strange it sounded. She quickly changed the subject. Jason is handling everything beautifully. The board seems relieved. I nodded weakly. I'm glad. You should be proud of him. I lowered my eyes to the soup without answering. Beatrice stood and straightened the blankets around my legs with exaggerated affection. Just focus on getting better. Leave the important decisions to people who aren't overwhelmed. There it was again. Their entire strategy depended on one narrative. Melanie wasn't dangerous. Melanie wasn't competent. Melanie wasn't capable. She was unstable. Once enough people believed that story, they thought they could justify almost anything. After she left, I pretended to eat lunch while secretly emptying most of the soup into a decorative plant beside the window. If they were willing to drug me once, they were willing to do it again. Around 4 o'clock, another hidden camera notification appeared on my tablet. Jason had returned home earlier than expected. I opened the living room feed just in time to hear Courtney laughing. The board actually believed you? Jason loosened his tie and poured himself a drink. Not completely. Beatrice frowned. What happened? Jason's smile disappeared. Daniel Harrison. The room became quiet. He delayed the transfer. Courtney looked confused. Can he do that? Jason nodded reluctantly. He demanded an independent medical capacity evaluation before recognizing the power of attorney. Beatrice slammed her glass onto the table. That lawyer has always been a problem. Jason rubbed his forehead. It doesn't matter. The evaluation is scheduled in 2 days. Once they declare Melanie mentally unfit to manage the company, Harrison won't be able to stop anything. My entire body became still. 2 days. That was the real deadline. Everything before now had simply been preparation. Beatrice leaned closer. Are you certain the doctor understands what's expected? Jason nodded confidently. He's already written the preliminary assessment. Courtney smiled again. So after the evaluation. Jason finished her sentence without hesitation. Melanie loses legal control of the company, I become permanent acting CEO, and we begin restructuring every major asset. Beatrice lifted her champagne glass once more. Then we're almost there. Jason raised his own glass. To $43 million. $43 million. Hearing the actual number spoken aloud erased every remaining doubt. This had never been about concern. Never about stress. Never about my health. It was about money. They had calculated the value of my life down to the last dollar. I quietly saved another copy of the recording before closing the tablet. Then I looked toward the locked bedroom door and smiled for the first time that day. They believed they had 48 hours left before taking everything from me. What they didn't know was that in exactly 48 hours, every lie they had built would begin collapsing under the weight of their own evidence. I barely slept that night, not because I was afraid, but because my mind refused to stop working. Every recording I had collected replayed over and over inside my head. Jason's smile as he held the fake power of attorney, Beatrice raising her champagne glass, Courtney laughing about my future as though my entire life were nothing more than an inheritance waiting to change hands. Until now, I believed their goal was simple. Steal my company. Take my money. Destroy my reputation. I was wrong. The next morning proved they had planned something far worse. Just after 8 o'clock, I heard movement downstairs. I quietly unlocked the hidden compartment behind the mirror, activated the live camera feeds, and watched Jason sitting across from a man in a gray suit carrying a black leather briefcase. I had never seen him before. Beatrice stood beside the fireplace while Courtney poured coffee into expensive porcelain cups. None of them looked nervous. They looked prepared. The stranger opened his briefcase and removed several folders stamped with medical logos. Jason leaned forward and asked, "How soon can this be done?" The man calmly replied, "If everything goes according to schedule, 48 hours." Beatrice nodded with satisfaction, while Courtney smiled. The man continued reading from the folder. "I've reviewed Dr. Carlisle's preliminary assessment. It already describes memory impairment, emotional instability, impaired executive judgment, and possible paranoid thinking." Courtney whispered, "Perfect." My stomach tightened. They were creating a psychiatric case against me. Jason tapped the folder. "Will one examination be enough?" The man shook his head. "Normally no, but with supporting statements from immediate family members and the attending physician, the court usually grants temporary conservatorship until a complete evaluation can be completed." Conservatorship. The word echoed through my mind. Suddenly, every missing piece of the puzzle snapped into place. They never intended to kill me. A dead woman creates investigations. A living woman declared mentally incompetent creates opportunities. If the court removed my legal capacity, I couldn't run my company. I couldn't challenge financial decisions. I couldn't access my own assets. I couldn't even decide my own medical treatment. Beatrice crossed her arms. "How long would she remain under supervision?" The attorney answered without emotion. "That depends on her recovery. If physicians continue documenting impaired judgment and unstable behavior, the conservatorship can last months, sometimes years." Courtney laughed. "Years?" The attorney nodded. "I've seen much longer." Silence settled across the room before Beatrice quietly said, "By then, nobody will even remember she built the company." Jason smiled. "History belongs to whoever controls the paperwork." I stared at the screen without moving. He wasn't simply trying to steal Aegis Technologies. He wanted to erase me completely. Investors would eventually believe he saved the company from an unstable founder. Employees would remember him as the leader. My name would slowly disappear from the story I had spent 15 years writing. The meeting continued as they discussed doctors, judges, financial authority, media strategy, and public perception. Every sentence was automatically recorded by my hidden security system. Every lie became evidence. Then the attorney handed Jason another folder. "You'll need signatures from 2 physicians before filing." Jason frowned. "We only have Carlisle." The attorney smiled confidently. "Leave the second signature to me." They shook hands, completely convinced nobody would ever hear this conversation. The moment the front door closed behind the attorney, I retrieved my emergency phone and sent Daniel Harrison a secure message. "Emergency. Conservatorship confirmed. Psychiatric evaluation scheduled within 48 hours. Unknown attorney arranging second physician. Full recording secured." Daniel replied less than a minute later. "Stay calm. We expected this possibility. Investigator already tracing the second physician. Continue collecting evidence. They are becoming careless." I exhaled slowly. Daniel wasn't surprised. That meant he already had a strategy. Still, one question refused to leave my mind. How long had Jason been planning this? I opened another encrypted application connected to Aegis Technologies' secure archive. Every executive email was automatically preserved before deletion. I searched Jason's account. Hundreds of ordinary messages appeared before one recovered archive caught my attention. It had been deleted months earlier. I opened it. The first email read, "If we push too soon, she'll become suspicious. We need the doctors to establish a pattern first." The message had been sent 8 months ago. 8 months. This wasn't desperation. It wasn't panic. It was a carefully planned conspiracy. Another email appeared beneath it. "She's beginning to question the vitamins. Reduce the dosage for now and increase it again next month." My hands became cold. The vitamins. Every morning, Jason handed me 2 capsules with breakfast. Every morning, I swallowed them because I trusted my husband. The third message was even worse. Carlisle says prolonged fatigue will strengthen the diagnosis later. Diagnosis, not treatment. Every unexplained headache. Every afternoon, I struggled to concentrate. Every morning, I woke up exhausted. None of it had been stress. They had been creating symptoms. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for exactly 30 seconds. I allowed myself one moment to mourn the marriage I believed I had. I remembered our wedding day, Jason promising he would always protect me, Jason holding my hands while promising we would build a future together. Those memories hadn't disappeared. They had simply become evidence that I had loved someone who never truly existed. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Melanie?" Beatrice called through the bedroom door. I immediately locked the tablet, returned it to the hidden compartment, closed the mirror, and climbed back into bed before she entered carrying fruit, yogurt, and herbal tea. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I thought you might enjoy breakfast." I smiled weakly. "Thank you." She placed the tray beside me before studying my face. "You look much better today." "I slept a little." She nodded approvingly. "That's wonderful because someone will be visiting this afternoon." I looked confused. "Who?" "A specialist." "What kind of specialist?" Her smile remained perfectly calm. "Someone who helps people after emotional episodes." I lowered my eyes. "I don't think I need that." Beatrice gently placed one hand on my shoulder. "My dear, the people who need help the most are usually the ones who don't realize they need it." There it was. The evaluation had already begun. They weren't waiting for the psychiatrist to arrive. Every conversation, every reaction, every hesitation would become part of the story they planned to tell the court. As Beatrice left the room, I quietly looked toward the hidden camera above the bookshelf and counted the hours in my head. 48. That was how long they believed they needed to take my freedom, my identity, and everything I had spent 15 years building. They had absolutely no idea those same 48 hours would become the evidence that destroyed every single one of them. The psychiatrist arrived exactly at 2 o'clock that afternoon. He introduced himself as Dr. Leonard Pierce, smiled politely, and carried nothing more than a leather notebook and a fountain pen. He looked nothing like the kind of man who could destroy someone's life with a single report. Jason welcomed him into the house, as though they had known each other for years. Beatrice personally poured him coffee while Courtney joked about how difficult I had become over the last several months. Before Dr. Pierce even walked upstairs to meet me, they had already spent nearly 15 minutes shaping the story they wanted him to believe. I watched everything through the hidden camera feed inside my bedroom. Their smiles were warm. Their voices were calm. Every lie sounded reasonable because they mixed it with small pieces of truth. Jason told him I had been working 16-hour days. That part was true. Beatrice claimed I had become emotionally distant from the family. Also true. Courtney said I often forgot conversations. That had happened several times during the past few months because someone had been drugging me. The most dangerous lies are always built around facts. Dr. Pierce eventually climbed the stairs and knocked gently on my bedroom door. "Mrs. Whitmore?" I answered softly. "Come in." He entered alone, closed the door behind him, and smiled professionally. "How are you feeling today?" I looked down at the blanket covering my legs. "Better than yesterday." He pulled a chair beside the bed instead of standing over me. That immediately made me respect him a little more. Unlike Dr. Carlisle, he didn't seem interested in rushing the conversation. "Your husband tells me you've been under tremendous pressure." I nodded slowly. "Running a company isn't easy. Do you enjoy your work?" The question surprised me. "Very much. Have you ever wanted to walk away from it?" "No." He wrote something in his notebook. "Have you recently experienced hallucinations?" "No." "Memory blackouts?" "Only after collapsing." "Thoughts of harming yourself?" "Never." He continued asking questions for nearly 30 minutes. My childhood, my education, my marriage, my daily routine, my responsibilities. Every answer I gave was calm, direct, and consistent. Then he leaned back in his chair and folded his notebook closed. "Mrs. Whitmore, may I ask you something unusual?" "Of course." Do you believe someone is trying to take your company? There it was. The trap. If I answered yes without evidence, Jason could argue I was paranoid. If I answered no, I ignored everything I had already discovered. I smiled faintly. Doctor, what I believe isn't important. He looked curious. Then what is? Evidence. He remained silent. I continued. If someone accused you of malpractice, would you want people to believe feelings or facts? He smiled for the first time. Facts. Exactly. I looked directly into his eyes. I don't need anyone to believe my suspicions. I only need them to examine the evidence. Something changed in his expression, just slightly, almost impossible to notice. He wasn't convinced I was right, but he was no longer convinced Jason was right either. He stood and thanked me for my time before leaving the room. Through the hidden camera, I watched Jason immediately pull him into the library downstairs. They closed the doors, but the directional microphone built into my security system captured every word. Jason spoke first. She's very intelligent. She always has been. Doctor, Pierce nodded. Yes. Jason sighed dramatically. That's what makes this so heartbreaking. She's convinced people are conspiring against her. Dr. Pierce remained quiet. Jason continued. She doesn't trust anyone anymore. Not even me. Another lie. The psychiatrist finally spoke. She seemed remarkably coherent. Beatrice quickly interrupted. She's always like that at first. Then the paranoia starts. Courtney added, last month she accused one of her executives of spying on her. That was technically true. Except, the executive had actually been leaking confidential information to one of our competitors and was fired after a formal investigation. They weren't inventing stories. They were twisting real events until they sounded insane. Doctor. Pierce looked thoughtful. I'll need another interview before reaching any conclusions. Jason frowned. Is that really necessary? Yes. The answer was immediate. Based on today's conversation, I don't have sufficient evidence to recommend emergency conservatorship. I felt a small wave of relief. Jason didn't. Perhaps you misunderstood her, he suggested carefully. Dr. Pierce shook his head. Perhaps. Then he gathered his notebook and left the house. The moment the front door closed, Beatrice exploded. What happened? Jason slammed his hand onto the kitchen counter. He's hesitating. Courtney looked worried. Can he refuse? Jason rubbed his forehead. If he won't cooperate, we'll use someone else. Beatrice lowered her voice. Carlyle mentioned another specialist. Jason nodded slowly. Then we'll move faster. I stared at the monitor. They weren't abandoning the plan. They were replacing the psychiatrist. That meant Dr. Pierce wasn't corrupt. Good. That also meant someone else probably was. My emergency phone vibrated again. Daniel's message appeared almost instantly. Excellent. Dr. Pierce refused preliminary certification. We verified he has no financial connection to the Whitmore family. Continue exactly as planned. I smiled. One honest doctor. That was all we needed. Another message appeared seconds later. Emily reports Jason spent the afternoon demanding access to executive financial systems. Every request was denied automatically. He believes the IT department is sabotaging him. I laughed quietly. Jason still didn't understand the company he wanted to steal. He believed Aegis Technologies was built around office buildings, bank accounts, and executive titles. It wasn't. The real company existed inside encrypted cloud architecture spread across multiple jurisdictions. The source code, client authentication systems, proprietary algorithms, licensing agreements, and operational infrastructure had already been transferred months earlier into the Atlas Trust after Daniel recommended additional protection following the hostile takeover attempt. The corporation Jason believed he controlled still existed. The offices still operated. Employees still arrived every morning, but the assets generating almost every dollar of revenue no longer belonged to the shell he thought he had captured. If Jason somehow succeeded in taking legal control tomorrow, he would inherit conference rooms, office furniture, payroll obligations, and a company name. The heart of Aegis Technologies was already somewhere he couldn't reach. I looked at the secure dashboard and watched another notification appear. Atlas migration completed. 100% verification confirmed. I closed my eyes for a moment and whispered, "Thank you." Months earlier, I approved the migration because it seemed like sensible corporate planning. Today, it became the reason my life's work would survive. Downstairs, I heard Jason raising his voice at someone over the phone. "I don't care what it costs," he shouted. "Find another doctor." I quietly locked the tablet, returned it to the hidden compartment, and looked toward the bedroom door. They believed they were running out of time. They were right, just not in the way they imagined. Every desperate move they made was creating another witness, another document, another recording, and another piece of evidence that would eventually stand against them in court. They still thought they were writing the ending to my story. They had no idea they were only writing the prosecution's case against themselves. The following morning, I woke before sunrise. For the first time since leaving the hospital, I wasn't thinking about survival, I was thinking about timing. Daniel's last message echoed in my mind. They're becoming desperate. Desperate people make expensive mistakes. I quietly opened the hidden compartment behind the mirror and checked the overnight security recordings. Jason had barely slept. He spent nearly 3 hours moving between his office, the library, and the downstairs study, making phone call after phone call. Every conversation sounded more anxious than the last. The psychiatrist hadn't given him what he needed, and without that recommendation, the conservatorship petition was already beginning to fall apart. Beatrice, however, refused to accept defeat. At 7:30 that morning, she called everyone into the dining room. Jason arrived carrying his laptop. Courtney carried a legal pad covered with handwritten notes. Beatrice stood at the head of the table like the chairwoman of a board meeting. "We're changing strategies," she announced. Jason looked exhausted. The psychiatrist slowed us down. "Then we'll stop relying on doctors," she replied. Courtney nodded eagerly. "What do you have in mind?" Beatrice smiled. "Witnesses." She spread several invitations across the dining table. "Tomorrow afternoon we're hosting a family brunch." Jason frowned. "Now?" "Exactly now." She looked at both of them with complete confidence. People believe what they see with their own eyes. If enough relatives witness Melanie acting confused, emotional, and unstable, nobody will question the conservatorship later. Courtney immediately understood. "We'll create the narrative ourselves." Beatrice smiled proudly. "Exactly." My stomach tightened. This wasn't just another family gathering. It was a carefully staged performance. Every guest would unknowingly become part of their plan. Jason slowly nodded. "If they all see her struggling, they'll repeat the same story later." "And judges love consistent witness statements," Beatrice answered. Courtney looked down at her notebook. "I've already started making a guest list." She began reading names aloud. Jason's uncle. 2 board members. Several longtime family friends. Their accountant. Even a retired judge who occasionally attended Whitmore family events. None of these people knew what was really happening. They would arrive expecting brunch. Instead, they would become witnesses in a manufactured case against me. I quietly activated another backup recorder, connected directly to the dining room camera. Every word mattered now. Jason leaned forward. "What if Melanie refuses to come downstairs?" Beatrice laughed softly. "She won't." Courtney looked confused. "How do you know?" Beatrice folded her hands. "Because she's polite. She spent her entire marriage trying to earn this family's approval. Even now she'll come downstairs because she won't want to embarrass Jason." I closed my eyes for a moment. She was right about one thing. The old Melanie would have done exactly that. She would have smiled, apologized for feeling sick, and tried to make everyone comfortable. That woman no longer existed. Jason looked uncertain. "What exactly are we trying to accomplish?" Beatrice answered without hesitation. "Simple. We convince everyone she's losing touch with reality." Courtney smiled. "And if she acts completely normal?" Beatrice calmly picked up a small prescription bottle from the table. "Then we'll help reality move in the right direction." My entire body froze. Jason stared at the bottle. "Are you sure? It's only a mild sedative." She twisted the cap open before placing it back on the table. Enough to slow her thinking. Enough to make her words seem disconnected. Nothing dangerous. Courtney picked up the bottle and read the label. Will anyone notice? Beatrice shook her head. Mixed into tea? Absolutely not. Jason hesitated longer than I expected. This is becoming risky. Beatrice looked directly into his eyes. Do you want the company or not? The room fell silent. Jason finally nodded. Fine. Courtney smiled. I'll prepare the tea myself. I stared at the screen without blinking. There it was. Everything Daniel needed. Conspiracy. Intent. Premeditation. They weren't reacting to circumstances anymore. They were actively creating false evidence. Every camera in the house was recording. Every microphone was working perfectly. They had absolutely no idea. My emergency phone vibrated softly. Daniel had sent another update. Court-approved independent toxicology request. Investigator identified second physician. Financial records link him to Whitmore Family Holdings through consulting payments. Search warrant pending. I smiled faintly. Things were moving faster than Jason realized. While he was busy planning a fake family brunch, federal investigators were quietly tracing financial transactions behind the scenes. Emily sent another message immediately afterward. Jason ordered executive payroll changes this morning. System rejected authorization again. He's becoming increasingly aggressive with senior staff. Several employees have started documenting his behavior independently. I wasn't surprised. Pressure changes people. Jason had spent years pretending to be patient, thoughtful, and controlled. Now that his timeline was collapsing, the real man was beginning to appear. Around noon, Beatrice climbed the stairs carrying a notebook. She knocked gently before entering my room. Feeling stronger today? I smiled politely. A little. She pulled a chair beside the bed. Wonderful. Tomorrow, we're having a small family brunch. I looked surprised. Tomorrow? Everyone is worried about you. She reached across and gently touched my hand. Seeing you will put their minds at ease. I lowered my eyes. I'm not sure I'm ready. Nonsense. She laughed warmly. You don't even have to stay long. Just smile, say hello, and let everyone see you're improving. Improving. The choice of words wasn't accidental. She wanted every guest arriving with the assumption that I had already been mentally unwell. I nodded slowly. If Jason thinks it's a good idea. She smiled with satisfaction. He does. After she left, I walked straight to the hidden compartment and opened another secure line to Daniel. Brunch confirmed. Approximately 20 guests. Plan involves drugging tea to simulate cognitive impairment. Entire conversation recorded. Daniel's response appeared almost immediately. Excellent. Do not drink anything. We already have a court-approved toxicology team standing by. Let them proceed. I leaned back in my chair and looked toward the bedroom window. Outside, gardeners carefully trimmed the hedges, while birds moved quietly through the trees. Everything looked peaceful, beautiful, ordinary. Inside the house, however, an entirely different kind of garden was growing. One planted with lies, manipulation, forged medical opinions, and calculated betrayal. Tomorrow, they believed they would convince an entire room that I was losing my mind. What they didn't know was that tomorrow would also be the day every person they invited became a witness, just not for the case they thought they were building. The next afternoon arrived exactly as Beatrice had planned. By 11:30, luxury cars began filling the circular driveway one after another. Through the hidden camera overlooking the front entrance, I watched relatives, family, friends, business associates, and several members of the Whitmore social circle step out carrying flowers, wine, and carefully wrapped gift baskets. They believed they were visiting a woman recovering from emotional exhaustion. None of them realized they had been invited to witness a carefully orchestrated performance. Jason had spent the entire morning greeting every guest with the expression of a husband carrying an impossible burden. He hugged people, thanked them for coming, and quietly repeated the same sentence over and over. She's trying her best, but some days are harder than others. It was brilliant in a disturbing way. Before anyone even saw me, They had already been told how to interpret everything I did. If I spoke too softly, they would think I was depressed. If I spoke too confidently, they would think I was manic. If I questioned anything, they would call it paranoia. They weren't gathering to discover the truth. They were arriving already convinced they knew it. Beatrice welcomed everyone into the dining room where an elegant brunch had been prepared. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandelier while fresh flowers decorated every table. Courtney moved between guests with trays of champagne and fresh orange juice, smiling as though she were hosting one of the family's famous holiday celebrations. The atmosphere felt warm, comfortable, and perfectly ordinary. That was exactly what made it dangerous. Jason finally climbed the stairs and knocked softly on my bedroom door. "Honey?" I answered quietly. "Come in." He entered wearing a navy suit and the same concerned smile he had perfected over the past several days. "Everyone's here." I looked nervous. "I don't know if I can do this." He sat beside me on the bed and gently held my hand. "You don't have to stay long. Just let everyone see you're okay." I looked into his eyes and wondered how many times that same face had lied to me over the past 10 years. "Will you stay with me?" I whispered. "The whole time," he promised. Another lie. I nodded slowly and allowed him to help me stand. We walked downstairs together while conversations gradually became quieter. Nearly 20 guests turned toward the staircase as I appeared beside Jason. I smiled politely. "Thank you all for coming." Several relatives applauded softly. One elderly aunt hugged me and whispered, "We're praying for you." I thanked her sincerely. None of these people were my enemies. Most of them simply believed the story Jason had carefully written for them. Beatrice immediately guided me toward the head of the dining table. "Sit here, dear." She deliberately chose the most visible chair in the room. Everyone would be watching me. Courtney disappeared into the kitchen and returned a few moments later carrying a silver tray filled with porcelain teacups. I recognized the tray immediately. It was the same one I had seen on the hidden camera the previous day, the tray they planned to use. Courtney smiled warmly as she placed a cup in front of each guest. When she reached me, she hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second before setting my cup on the table. "Chamomile," she said sweetly. "It'll help you relax." I smiled back. "Thank you." I wrapped my fingers around the warm porcelain but made no attempt to drink. Conversation slowly returned as everyone began discussing vacations, grandchildren, local politics, and charitable events. Jason remained beside me, constantly asking if I felt comfortable. Every few minutes he gently reminded me to drink my tea. "It'll help with the headache," he whispered. I nodded each time without lifting the cup. Across the table, Beatrice watched me carefully. She wasn't interested in the conversation. She was waiting. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Courtney looked increasingly anxious. Finally, Beatrice stood and tapped her spoon lightly against her glass. "Before lunch," she announced with a smile, "I'd like to thank everyone for supporting Jason during this difficult time. Caring for someone struggling with mental health challenges isn't easy." The room became silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. Jason lowered his head modestly. "I'm just doing what any husband would do." Several guests nodded sympathetically. Beatrice continued, "Many of you have asked how Melanie is doing. Some days are wonderful. Others." She sighed dramatically. "Well, recovery isn't always predictable." I remained perfectly still. An older family friend leaned toward me kindly. "We're all rooting for you, dear." I smiled. "Thank you." Beatrice looked almost disappointed that I sounded perfectly normal. She glanced toward Courtney. Courtney understood immediately. She spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Melanie, have you been taking your medication?" I looked at her calmly. "Which medication?" "The one Dr. Carlisle prescribed." I shook my head. "He prescribed several things." Jason quickly joined the conversation. "The calming medication." I tilted my head slightly. I don't remember him saying it was calming medication. The room became quiet again. Beatrice smiled sympathetically toward the guests. "Memory has been one of the biggest challenges." Several people nodded with concern. Exactly as she hoped. Jason reached toward my teacup. Maybe drink a little tea first. I slowly lifted the cup toward my lips, pretending to take a sip while allowing the liquid to touch only the edge of the porcelain. Then I carefully lowered it back onto the saucer. Nobody noticed. Nobody except the tiny camera hidden inside the decorative clock on the fireplace. Every movement was being recorded, every conversation, every expression. Suddenly the front doorbell rang. Everyone looked toward the hallway. Courtney frowned. Were we expecting someone? Beatrice shook her head. A housekeeper hurried to answer the door. 30 seconds later, she returned, looking confused. Mrs. Whitmore, she said quietly. There's a courier asking specifically for Melanie. Jason immediately stood. I'll handle it. Before anyone could respond, he walked quickly toward the entrance. Through the hidden camera connected to my tablet upstairs, I watched him open the front door. A uniformed courier handed him a sealed overnight envelope requiring my signature. Jason looked irritated. She's resting. The courier shook his head. Federal delivery. Signature must come directly from the recipient. My heart skipped once. Daniel. He wasn't sending documents. He was sending a message. Jason hesitated before reluctantly returning to the dining room carrying the envelope. Melanie, he said through a forced smile. This needs your signature. Every guest watched as I calmly accepted the envelope. Printed across the front in bold black letters were the words, Confidential, Legal Notice. Jason's confident smile faded almost instantly. Beatrice stared at the envelope without blinking. Courtney suddenly looked nervous. They had no idea what was inside. Neither did I. But judging from the fear spreading across their faces, they understood something I had been waiting days to see. For the first time since this nightmare began, they realized they were no longer the only ones making moves. Jason's smile disappeared the moment he saw the words, Confidential, Legal Notice, printed across the front of the envelope. Every conversation around the dining table stopped. Nearly 20 pairs of eyes shifted between me, Jason, and the sealed package resting in my hands. I looked down at it calmly before running one finger beneath the seal. Jason immediately spoke. Melanie, maybe that can wait until later. I looked up innocently. Why? You're tired. His answer came too quickly. Legal documents can be stressful. I smiled faintly. If they're important enough to require my signature, I think they're important enough to read. Nobody argued. I carefully removed several pages from the envelope. The first document was exactly what Daniel and I had arranged the previous evening. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a court order. It was an official notice informing me that, because of unusual corporate activity involving Aegis Technologies, my attorney strongly advised that I personally verify every financial transaction before approving any transfer of authority. At the bottom of the page appeared Daniel Harrison's signature and his firm's embossed seal. I slowly read the letter while Jason watched every movement on my face. Beatrice could barely hide her irritation. Courtney looked completely confused. Finally, Jason forced a smile. Just routine legal language. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back inside the envelope. Probably. Then I looked directly at him. Daniel says someone has been attempting to access restricted executive systems without authorization. Jason's expression remained calm, but I noticed his fingers tightening around the back of his chair. That happens all the time. Does it? I asked quietly. Cybersecurity companies receive attacks every day. His explanation sounded reasonable to everyone else. To me, it sounded desperate. I nodded as though satisfied. I'm glad Daniel is being careful. Across the table, Beatrice quickly changed the subject. Lunch is getting cold. Everyone slowly returned to their conversations, but the atmosphere had changed. The easy confidence Jason carried all morning had disappeared. Every few minutes I caught him glancing toward the envelope as though it might suddenly explode. He didn't know what Daniel knew. That uncertainty was beginning to affect him. Courtney eventually stood and started serving dessert. As she placed a slice of lemon tart in front of me, she quietly whispered, "You still haven't finished your tea." I smiled politely. "I'm not very thirsty." Her eyes drifted toward Beatrice for just a second. They were running out of patience. 5 minutes later, another opportunity arrived. One of Jason's uncles looked at me kindly and asked, "Melanie, are you planning to return to work soon?" Before I could answer, Beatrice spoke for me. "The doctors believe she needs several months away from business." I turned toward her. "Really?" She smiled sympathetically. "That's what they recommended." I looked around the table. "That's interesting." Jason immediately sensed danger. "Melanie." I ignored him. "Because no doctor has actually told me that." Silence settled over the room. Several guests exchanged confused looks. Beatrice laughed lightly. "You probably don't remember." I nodded slowly. "Maybe." Then I reached into the envelope again and removed the second page Daniel had included. "Actually," I said quietly, "my attorney recommended that I request written copies of every medical recommendation before agreeing to anything." Jason's face became noticeably tense. One of the board members sitting halfway down the table leaned forward with interest. "That sounds reasonable." Another guest nodded. "I would do the same." Beatrice immediately tried to regain control. "Legal people always overcomplicate simple situations." "Perhaps," I answered, "but they usually save us from expensive mistakes." Jason forced another smile. "Nobody is trying to pressure you." I looked directly into his eyes. "Then I'm sure you won't mind waiting until Daniel reviews everything." He didn't answer immediately. That hesitation lasted less than 3 seconds, but everyone at the table noticed it. The conversation never fully recovered after that. Guests continued eating, but more than one person quietly observed Jason and Beatrice instead of me. The narrative they had carefully built over the past several days was beginning to crack. Around 2 o'clock, people slowly started leaving. Jason walked each guest to the front door while thanking them for their support. I remained seated until the last car disappeared beyond the gates. The moment the front door closed, Beatrice's pleasant expression vanished. "What was that?" she demanded. Jason threw the envelope onto the dining table. "Daniel." Courtney looked frightened. "Did something happen?" Jason rubbed both hands across his face. "The board postponed tomorrow's executive vote." Beatrice stared at him. "Why?" "Because Harrison informed them there are legal questions regarding my temporary authority." Courtney looked confused. "Can he stop it?" Jason nodded reluctantly. "Only temporarily." Beatrice slammed one hand onto the table. "We don't have time for temporary." Jason remained silent. She stepped closer. "Every day she stays legally competent is another day she can destroy everything." Jason looked toward the envelope. "She doesn't know enough yet." I almost smiled. He still believed that. Courtney spoke quietly. "Maybe we should move forward with the conservatorship immediately." Jason nodded. "That's exactly what we'll do." Beatrice crossed her arms. "No more delays." Jason picked up his phone and walked into the study. Through the hidden security camera, I watched him close the door before making another call. "This is Jason Whitmore," he said firmly. "I need to speak with Dr. Carlisle immediately." A pause. "No, I don't care that it's Sunday." Another pause. "Tell him we're moving the evaluation to tomorrow morning." My heartbeat slowed instead of accelerating. Good. They were making the mistake Daniel predicted. They were rushing. Desperate people abandon careful planning. Careless people create evidence. Jason continued speaking. "I don't want another independent assessment. I want the paperwork ready before noon." He listened for several seconds before lowering his voice. "Whatever it costs." The call ended. A second later, another notification appeared on my emergency phone. Daniel had somehow already learned about the change. Excellent. Carlisle just contacted the court requesting emergency certification. Judge denied expedited review and ordered all parties to appear together tomorrow afternoon. "We now have jurisdiction. Do not reveal anything. Let Jason continue." I quietly locked my phone and looked out the bedroom window. Tomorrow afternoon. Everything was finally beginning to converge. Jason believed tomorrow would be the day he legally took control of my company. Beatrice believed tomorrow would be the day I lost my freedom. Courtney believed tomorrow would make her wealthy. None of them understood that tomorrow would also place every lie, every forged report, every secret payment, every recorded conversation, and every piece of stolen evidence into one courtroom. And for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I realized I wasn't waiting for justice anymore. Justice was already on its way. The following morning was unlike any other morning in my life. I wasn't preparing for another board meeting, another product launch, or another negotiation. I was preparing to discover whether the legal system would protect the truth or reward the best liar. At exactly 8 o'clock, Jason knocked on my bedroom door wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. His expression was calm again, too calm. The panic I had seen the previous afternoon had completely disappeared. That frightened me more than his anger ever could. Confident people rarely become that relaxed unless they believe they have solved their biggest problem. "Good morning," he said gently. "The court moved the hearing to this afternoon." I looked surprised. "Court?" He smiled sympathetically. "Nothing serious. Just a formality before the temporary conservatorship begins." I lowered my eyes as though trying to understand. "You mean someone else will make decisions for me?" Jason reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "Only until you're healthy again." I nodded slowly. "Will you be making those decisions?" "Only because I love you." Another lie. He had become so comfortable lying that the words came as naturally as breathing. Downstairs, Beatrice and Courtney were already waiting in the breakfast room. Neither woman bothered pretending anymore. They looked confident, relaxed, almost victorious. Beatrice poured herself coffee before looking directly at me. "Today's going to be difficult, dear, but afterward everything will become much easier." Courtney smiled. "You'll finally be able to rest." I almost asked whether prison would also help them rest someday, but I kept the thought to myself. Instead, I quietly sat down and pretended to struggle with my appetite. Jason checked his watch. "Daniel Harrison will probably be there." Beatrice dismissed the concern with a wave of her hand. "One lawyer can't change medical opinions." I nearly smiled. She still believed this case was about medicine. It hadn't been about medicine for several days. It had become a fraud investigation. 40 minutes later, we arrived at the county courthouse. I had expected a large courtroom packed with spectators. Instead, we were directed into a private probate courtroom where conservatorship hearings were normally held. The room was smaller than I imagined. One judge, one court reporter, a clerk, two sheriff's deputies. Everything felt strangely quiet. Jason helped me into my chair while Beatrice sat directly behind us. Courtney remained beside their attorney, whispering occasionally while organizing several binders filled with medical records and affidavits. Then the courtroom doors opened again. Daniel Harrison walked inside carrying two thick trial boxes and a leather briefcase. Behind him came Emily Chen, my chief operating officer, then my chief financial officer, then the chairman of Aegis Technologies' board of directors. Jason's smile disappeared almost instantly. He hadn't expected them. Daniel stopped beside me and spoke softly. "How are you holding up?" "Better now." He nodded once before taking his seat. Across the room, Jason leaned toward his attorney. "Why is the board here?" The attorney quietly answered. "I don't know." For the first time since waking up in the hospital, uncertainty appeared on Jason's face. "Good." The judge entered precisely at 1 o'clock. Everyone stood. After reviewing the docket, she looked toward Jason's attorney. "Counsel, you may proceed." The attorney confidently rose to his feet. "Your Honor, we are requesting temporary emergency conservatorship due to Mrs. Whitmore's documented cognitive decline, impaired executive judgment, and inability to safely manage her financial affairs." He submitted several medical reports to the clerk. Dr. Carlisle's preliminary evaluation, hospital records, family statements, written declarations from Beatrice, Courtney, and Jason. Everything exactly as Daniel predicted. The judge reviewed the documents briefly before looking toward Daniel. "Mr. Harrison?" Daniel stood calmly. "Your Honor," before responding to the petition itself, I request permission to address the court regarding newly discovered evidence directly affecting the credibility of the petitioners. Jason's attorney immediately objected. Irrelevant. Daniel didn't even look at him. It goes directly to fraud upon the court. The judge paused. Proceed. Daniel opened the first trial box and removed a thick binder. Your Honor, over the past 72 hours, my client has quietly collected evidence demonstrating that this conservatorship petition is not intended to protect Mrs. Whitmore. He paused deliberately. Its purpose is to obtain control of assets exceeding $43 million. Complete silence filled the courtroom. Jason remained perfectly still. Beatrice folded her arms tighter across her chest. Courtney looked confused. Daniel continued. Furthermore, this petition relies upon medical conclusions influenced by undisclosed financial relationships between members of the Whitmore family and at least one evaluating physician. Jason's attorney immediately stood again. Speculation. Daniel smiled faintly. Not speculation. He reached into the second trial box. Bank records. Then another document. Consulting agreements. Another. Electronic communications. Another. Recorded conversations. I watched Jason's face carefully. Every new document removed a little more color from it. Beatrice leaned toward her attorney and whispered urgently. Courtney's hands began shaking. Daniel wasn't finished. Your Honor, before filing this petition, the petitioners repeatedly discussed creating the appearance of mental illness rather than evaluating whether mental illness actually existed. The courtroom became completely silent. Even the judge stopped writing. Daniel looked directly at the clerk. At this time, I request permission to play Exhibit 1. Jason suddenly stood. Objection. His voice cracked for the first time since this nightmare began. The recording hasn't been authenticated. Daniel calmly answered. It has. Chain of custody, metadata verification, digital forensic certification, and sworn authentication affidavits are already included in Exhibit A through Exhibit F. Jason slowly sat back down. His attorney looked at him without speaking. Neither of them had expected this. Neither of them knew the recordings even existed. The judge nodded once. Play the recording. Daniel connected a small speaker to his laptop. The courtroom fell completely silent. Then Beatrice's unmistakable voice echoed through the room. By then, nobody will even remember she built the company. Another voice followed. Jason, calm, confident. History belongs to whoever controls the paperwork. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The recording continued. Courtney laughed. Years? The attorney answered. I've seen conservatorships last much longer. Then Beatrice quietly said, Perfect. Jason closed his eyes. Beatrice stared straight ahead. Courtney looked like she might faint. The recording ended. The silence afterward felt even louder than the recording itself. The judge slowly removed her reading glasses and looked directly at Jason. Mr. Whitmore, she said carefully, would you like to explain what this court has just heard? The courtroom remained completely silent after the recording ended. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked at me anymore. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Jason. A few seconds earlier, he had entered the courtroom believing he would leave with legal control over my life. Now he couldn't even look at the judge. The recording had stripped away every carefully rehearsed performance. There was no loving husband sitting at the petitioner's table anymore. There was only a man whose own voice had just described a plan to erase his wife from the company she had built. The judge slowly removed her glasses and placed them on the bench. Mr. Whitmore, she said calmly, would you like to explain why this court just heard you discussing the transfer of your wife's company before any determination of incapacity had been made? Jason swallowed hard before standing. Your Honor, those recordings were taken out of context. Daniel remained seated. He didn't interrupt. He didn't smile. He simply waited. The judge looked at Jason. Then give me the proper context. Jason glanced toward his attorney, hoping for guidance. The attorney quietly nodded, encouraging him to answer. My wife had been under tremendous stress for months, Jason began. We were discussing contingency planning in case her condition became worse. Daniel slowly stood. Permission to respond, Your Honor? Granted. Daniel opened another trial box and removed a printed transcript. The recording played moments ago lasted only 6 minutes because I respected the court's time. The complete recording lasts 1 hour and 18 minutes. Jason's attorney immediately looked alarmed. Daniel continued. The remaining 68 minutes include detailed discussions regarding transferring corporate assets, removing Mrs. Whitmore from all executive authority, altering public perception of her mental health, and ensuring she would never regain control of the company. Complete silence filled the courtroom again. Jason's attorney slowly lowered his eyes toward the table. Daniel wasn't finished. Most importantly, he continued, the petitioners repeatedly state these plans before any psychiatrist had reached a diagnosis. The judge turned toward Jason. Is that accurate? Jason hesitated. I don't remember the exact conversation. Daniel calmly replied. Fortunately, the recording remembers. A few quiet laughs echoed through the courtroom before disappearing almost immediately. Jason's confidence was beginning to collapse. Beatrice suddenly stood without being asked. Your Honor, my son has done nothing except protect his wife. The judge looked at her. Sit down, Mrs. Whitmore. She reluctantly obeyed. Daniel waited until she sat before reaching into the second evidence box. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit 21. He handed several photographs to the clerk. The judge studied them carefully. What am I looking at? Daniel answered. Prescription bottles recovered from Mrs. Whitmore's residence, laboratory testing results, pharmacy purchase records, and toxicology reports. Jason's attorney immediately objected. Relevance? Daniel looked directly at the judge. The petition claims Mrs. Whitmore developed unexplained cognitive decline. These reports identify the likely cause. The courtroom became quiet once more. Daniel continued. Independent laboratory analysis confirmed the capsules Mrs. Whitmore believed were daily vitamins contained prescription sedatives capable of causing fatigue, memory impairment, slowed cognition, and confusion when administered repeatedly over an extended period. Every person in the courtroom turned toward Jason. I watched the color disappear from his face. The judge slowly placed the laboratory report on the bench. Who provided these medications? Daniel answered without hesitation. We believe Mr. Whitmore personally delivered them each morning. Jason immediately stood. That's ridiculous. Daniel looked at him calmly. Is it? He reached for another document. Pharmacy surveillance footage identifies Mr. Whitmore purchasing the medication under Dr. Carlisle's authorization. Jason froze. Daniel placed another folder before the judge. Electronic payment records show those prescriptions were billed through Whitmore Family Holdings rather than Mrs. Whitmore's medical insurance. The judge looked directly at Jason. Did you administer these medications to your wife? Jason's voice became noticeably weaker. I gave her vitamins. Daniel stepped forward. Would you like this court to compare your statement with the pharmacy records? Jason didn't answer. Beatrice suddenly interrupted. He trusted the doctor's instructions. Daniel nodded slightly. An excellent point. He removed another exhibit, which brings us to Dr. Carlisle. The courtroom doors opened almost immediately. Every head turned toward the entrance. A sheriff's deputy escorted Dr. Carlisle into the room. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't carrying a briefcase. He was carrying a subpoena. Jason stared at him in disbelief. Doctor. Carlisle looked nothing like the confident physician I had seen at the hospital. His tie was crooked. His face looked pale. His hands shook slightly as he took the witness stand. After being sworn in, Daniel approached quietly. Doctor, did you prescribe medication to Mrs. Whitmore? Yes. Did you personally diagnose a psychiatric disorder before prescribing those medications? Carlisle hesitated. No. Did you recommend emergency conservatorship before conducting a complete psychiatric evaluation? Another pause. Yes. Daniel nodded. Why? Carlisle looked toward Jason, then toward Beatrice, finally toward the judge. He closed his eyes for a brief moment before answering. Because I was asked to. The room exploded into whispers. The judge struck the gavel twice. Order. Daniel waited patiently until the courtroom became quiet again. Who asked you? Carlyle's breathing became heavier. Mr. Whitmore. Jason immediately shouted. He's lying. Daniel ignored him. Did anyone else participate? Carlyle swallowed hard. Mrs. Beatrice Whitmore attended several meetings. Another wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. The judge looked increasingly disturbed. Daniel continued. Did anyone discuss financial compensation? Carlyle lowered his head. Yes. Jason's attorney stood abruptly. Your Honor, my client objects. The judge cut him off immediately. Sit down, counsel. The attorney slowly obeyed. Daniel placed one final document on the witness stand. Doctor, is this your consulting agreement with Whitmore Family Holdings? Carlyle stared at the signature for several seconds before quietly answering, Yes. Daniel turned toward the judge. The agreement was signed 4 months before Mrs. Whitmore's hospitalization. It provided monthly consulting payments in exchange for what it described as executive wellness services. The judge looked at the contract before raising her eyes toward Jason. Mr. Whitmore. Is there any legitimate explanation for why your family company was secretly paying your wife's physician while simultaneously preparing a petition to declare her mentally incompetent? Jason opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time since I met him 10 years earlier, he had absolutely no answer. Daniel slowly returned to his table, but before sitting down, he looked toward the judge one final time. Your Honor, we have only presented approximately 30% of the available evidence. The courtroom became completely silent again. Then the judge looked directly at the bailiff and spoke in a voice that changed the entire direction of the hearing. I believe this matter has now moved far beyond conservatorship. Bailiff, do not allow anyone to leave this courtroom. Nobody moved after the judge's order. The courtroom, which only minutes earlier had been hearing a routine conservatorship petition, suddenly felt like the opening moments of a criminal trial. 2 sheriff's deputies quietly stepped toward the courtroom doors and remained there without saying a word. The message was unmistakable. Nobody was leaving. Jason slowly lowered himself back into his chair, his face almost completely drained of color. Beatrice looked stunned for the first time since this nightmare began. Courtney's hands trembled so badly she accidentally dropped her notebook onto the floor. The silence stretched for several seconds before the judge looked directly at Daniel Harrison. Mr. Harrison, you indicated the evidence presented today represents only a portion of what you have. Is that correct? Daniel nodded calmly. Yes, Your Honor. How much more? Daniel looked down at the 2 evidence boxes beside his table before answering. Approximately 400 additional pages of financial records, digital forensic reports, banking transactions, internal emails, pharmacy records, surveillance footage, audio recordings, and sworn witness statements. Even the court reporter briefly stopped typing. Jason's attorney slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. He was beginning to understand what kind of case he had walked into. Daniel continued speaking in the same calm voice he had used since the hearing began. Initially, we believed this matter involved attempted financial exploitation through an improper conservatorship petition. As our investigation continued, the evidence suggested a far broader conspiracy. The judge leaned forward. Explain. Daniel opened another evidence binder. Your Honor, 3 separate investigations have been running simultaneously over the past 72 hours. A civil investigation conducted by my office, a financial fraud investigation initiated by Aegis Technologies, and a criminal investigation involving local law enforcement after the toxicology findings were confirmed. Jason immediately stood. Criminal? His voice cracked so sharply that everyone in the courtroom turned toward him. Daniel didn't even acknowledge the interruption. Yes. He handed another folder to the clerk. Yesterday evening, investigators executed preservation warrants involving Whitmore Family Holdings, Dr. Carlyle's medical practice, and several financial institutions. Beatrice looked toward Jason with visible panic. You never told me that. Jason didn't answer because he clearly hadn't known. Daniel continued. Electronic banking records reveal a series of payments totaling $486,000 transferred through Shell consulting agreements over the past 11 months. The judge examined the documents carefully. Purpose? Daniel answered. Officially, they were described as executive wellness consulting. He paused before adding, no consulting services were ever performed. Doctor. Carlyle slowly lowered his head. The judge looked toward him. Doctor. Is that statement accurate? Carlyle closed his eyes. Yes. Another wave of whispers filled the courtroom before the judge struck the gavel again. Order. Daniel calmly walked toward the courtroom display monitor. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to present a timeline. Proceed. Seconds later, a detailed chart appeared on the screen. Every payment, every email, every medical appointment, every prescription, every executive authorization request, everything connected together by dates. Daniel pointed to the first entry. 8 months ago, Mr. Whitmore began researching conservatorship statutes. Then another entry. 7 months ago, Dr. Carlyle received his first consulting payment. Another. 6 months ago, Mrs. Whitmore began reporting unexplained fatigue during executive meetings. Another. 5 months ago, additional sedative prescriptions were issued despite no psychiatric diagnosis. Another. 3 months ago, Whitmore Family Holdings retained outside counsel specializing in guardianship law. The courtroom remained silent as the timeline continued growing across the screen. By the time Daniel reached the final entry, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Nothing had happened by accident. Every event built upon the previous one. Every payment supported the next step. Every prescription moved the plan closer to execution. The judge slowly looked toward Jason. Mr. Whitmore, this appears remarkably organized. Jason finally found his voice. Your Honor, my wife built contingency systems into every part of her company. She sees conspiracies everywhere. Daniel smiled faintly. An interesting observation. He pressed another key on the presentation remote. The screen changed. Security footage from the Whitmore dining room appeared. The timestamp matched the morning before the family brunch. The recording began playing. Everyone watched Beatrice remove a prescription bottle from her handbag and place it on the table. Courtney picked it up. Jason asked, Are you sure? Then Beatrice answered with perfect clarity, It's only a mild sedative, enough to slow her thinking, enough to make her words seem disconnected. The video continued until Jason quietly said, Fine. Daniel paused the recording. Nobody in the courtroom spoke. The judge stared at the frozen image on the screen for several long seconds. Jason's attorney finally stood. Your Honor? He hesitated. The confidence he carried at the beginning of the hearing had completely disappeared. I would like a brief recess to speak with my client. The judge considered the request before nodding. 10 minutes. The bailiff announced the recess, but the deputies remained beside the courtroom doors. Nobody was permitted to leave. Jason immediately turned toward his attorney. Their conversation was quiet, but not quiet enough. We need to settle this, Jason whispered urgently. The attorney looked directly at him. Settle? Jason nodded. Whatever she wants. The attorney shook his head slowly. I don't think you understand. Jason frowned. Understand what? The attorney lowered his voice even further. This stopped being a civil matter about 30 minutes ago. Jason stared at him. What are you saying? The attorney looked toward the sheriff's deputies standing near the entrance. I'm saying you should stop worrying about the company. Jason's face went completely pale. Then what should I worry about? Before the attorney could answer, the courtroom doors opened again. 2 detectives wearing dark suits entered carrying additional evidence boxes. They walked directly toward Daniel, exchanged a few quiet words, and handed him a sealed folder marked Supplemental Report. Daniel opened it, quickly reviewed the first page, then looked toward me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine surprise on his face. Not fear, surprise. He walked over quietly and whispered, We just received something we weren't expecting. I looked at him. Good or bad? Daniel gave the smallest smile. Very good. The judge returned to the bench moments later. Everyone stood. After reviewing the new folder Daniel handed to the clerk, she looked toward him. "Mr. Harrison, would you like to supplement the record?" Daniel nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." He slowly opened the new report. Approximately 45 minutes ago, investigators completed forensic analysis on Mr. Whitmore's personal laptop seized under warrant. Jason closed his eyes. Daniel continued. Among the recovered files was a folder titled Project Phoenix. Nobody in the courtroom reacted because nobody understood the significance of the name. Daniel looked directly at Jason before speaking again. Project Phoenix was the internal code name Mr. Whitmore assigned to the plan for taking permanent control of Mrs. Whitmore's company. Complete silence filled the courtroom. Daniel opened the first document recovered from the folder. The project timeline estimates Mrs. Whitmore would remain under conservatorship for 18 to 24 months. He opened another page. Following that period, all remaining intellectual property would be permanently transferred into a newly formed holding company solely controlled by Mr. Whitmore. Then another page. Phase 4 is labeled. Daniel stopped briefly before reading the final line aloud. Public rebranding. Remove Melanie from company history. I felt every sound disappear from the room. Even after everything they had done, seeing those words in Jason's own planning documents hurt more than I expected. He hadn't simply wanted my company. He wanted to erase every trace that I had ever built it. The judge slowly closed the folder before looking directly at Jason. Her voice remained calm, but every word carried enormous weight. "Mr. Whitmore." She paused briefly. "I believe you have a far more serious problem than this conservatorship petition." The judge's words landed like a hammer. For a moment, Jason simply stared at her as if language itself had stopped making sense. He had walked into that courtroom expecting to become my legal guardian. He expected to leave with authority over my company, my money, my medical care, and my freedom. Instead, the court had just seen his own planning document labeled Project Phoenix, and every page proved what I had known from the moment I woke up in that hospital bed. This was never about concern. It was never about love. It was never about protecting me from stress. It was a coordinated attempt to erase me from my own life. Jason's attorney slowly stood, but even he seemed unsure what to say. "Your Honor, my client requests a recess before responding to any further allegations." The judge looked at him for several seconds. "Denied." Jason's attorney swallowed. "Your Honor, denied," she repeated. This court was asked to grant emergency conservatorship over a woman whose property, medical autonomy, and corporate authority were at immediate risk. The petitioners represented this as a protective proceeding. The evidence now suggests the petition itself may have been part of a broader fraud. Beatrice suddenly stood. "This is outrageous." The judge turned toward her with a look so sharp the entire courtroom went still. "Mrs. Whitmore, sit down." Beatrice remained standing. "My son was trying to save his wife, bring us." The judge's voice became colder. "Sit down, or I will have you removed." For the first time since I had known her, Beatrice obeyed immediately. Daniel rose again. "Your Honor, my client requests dismissal of the conservatorship petition with prejudice, restoration and confirmation of her full legal capacity, immediate preservation of all Whitmore family financial records related to this matter, and referral of the evidence to the appropriate criminal authorities." Jason slammed both hands onto the table. "This is insane!" The deputies near the door shifted slightly. His attorney grabbed his sleeve and whispered something urgent, but Jason shook him off. "No, I am not going to sit here while she pretends to be the victim." Every person in the courtroom turned toward him. His mask was gone now. The soft husband, the worried caretaker, the polished executive. All of them had disappeared. The real Jason stood there, breathing hard, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. He pointed at me. "She set this whole thing up." Daniel calmly replied, "You are correct." The courtroom froze. Jason blinked. "What?" Daniel looked directly at him. "Mrs. Whitmore set up security systems, after noticing unexplained access to her files, unusual medication patterns, and suspicious attempts to obtain corporate authority. She did what any competent executive would do. She protected herself. Jason opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel continued. You, on the other hand, discussed drugging her, paying doctors, manipulating witnesses, filing a false petition, and erasing her from company history. He paused. Those are not the same thing. The judge nodded slightly. Jason looked around the courtroom as though searching for someone to save him. Nobody did. Not Beatrice, not Courtney, not his lawyer, not even Dr. Carlyle, who sat with his head bowed like a man already imagining prison walls. Then the judge spoke. The petition for temporary conservatorship is denied. The court reporter typed rapidly. My breath caught. I had known Daniel was prepared. I had known the evidence was strong. But hearing the judge say it aloud made something loosen inside my chest. The court further finds, the judge continued, that Mrs. Melanie Whitmore has demonstrated coherent understanding of her affairs, consistent decision-making capacity, and appropriate legal judgment under extraordinary circumstances. I closed my eyes for half a second. Full capacity, full authority, full ownership of my own life, the judge continued. All documents filed by Mr. Jason Whitmore purporting to grant him authority over Mrs. Whitmore's medical, personal, financial, or corporate affairs are suspended pending further review. Jason whispered, No. The judge ignored him. The court orders immediate preservation of all financial and electronic records connected to Whitmore Family Holdings, Dr. Carlyle's practice, and any entity involved in the attempted transfer of Mrs. Whitmore's assets. Beatrice's face went pale. She understood that sentence better than anyone. Preservation meant discovery. Discovery meant bank records, emails, texts, contracts, payments. Everything they thought was hidden would be dragged into daylight. Then the judge looked toward the detective standing near the side wall. Detective? One of the detectives stepped forward. Your Honor, based on the evidence entered today and prior findings from toxicology, financial records, and digital communications, we are prepared to act. The judge nodded once. Proceed. Jason turned toward his attorney. What does that mean? Nobody answered. The first detective approached him while the second moved toward Beatrice. The courtroom became completely silent except for the sound of shoes against polished wood. Jason backed away instinctively. Wait, hold on. You can't. The detective spoke clearly. Jason Whitmore, you are being taken into custody pending charges related to fraud, conspiracy, unlawful administration of controlled medication, attempted financial exploitation, and obstruction. Jason's face collapsed. This is a mistake. The detective turned him around and placed his hands behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. Courtney let out a sharp sob. Beatrice stood abruptly. Take your hands off my son. The second detective stepped in front of her. Beatrice Whitmore, you are also being detained pending charges related to conspiracy, witness manipulation, financial fraud, and attempted unlawful conservatorship. Beatrice looked genuinely shocked. Me? Yes, ma'am. I did nothing wrong. Daniel quietly pressed a button on his laptop. Beatrice's own voice filled the courtroom again. Enough to slow her thinking. Enough to make her words seem disconnected. The recording stopped. Beatrice's mouth opened, then closed. The detective turned her gently but firmly and placed her in handcuffs. Courtney began crying harder. What about me? Nobody needed to answer for long. The first detective looked toward her. Courtney Whitmore, please stand. Her entire body shook. I didn't do anything. Daniel opened another folder. Your Honor, the record includes footage of Miss Whitmore handling the medication bottle intended for my client, attempting to access Mrs. Whitmore's private office, and wearing jewelry removed from Mrs. Whitmore's secured closet. Courtney looked at me with hatred and terror. You recorded that? I finally spoke for the first time in several minutes. You did it in my house. She had no answer. The detective escorted her from the table moments later. She wasn't handcuffed immediately, but the message was clear. Her day was only beginning. As Jason was led toward the courtroom doors, he suddenly stopped and turned toward me. His eyes were red now. His voice came out lower, almost desperate. "Melanie." I looked at him. For a brief moment, the courtroom faded, and I saw the man I married, the man who once danced with me in our kitchen at midnight, the man who cried during our vows, the man who held me after my first major product launch and told me no one deserved success more than I did. I wanted that man to have been real. I wanted at least one part of our marriage to be something other than a lie. Jason swallowed hard. "You don't have to do this." There it was. Not an apology, not remorse, not shame. Just one final attempt to make me responsible for the consequences of his choices. I stood slowly. The room remained silent. "I didn't do this, Jason." My voice was steady. "You did." His face tightened. "After everything we were." "After everything we were," I said softly. "You drugged me, lied about my mind, tried to steal my company, and planned to erase my name from my own work." Tears filled his eyes. Maybe real, maybe another performance. It no longer mattered. "I loved you," he whispered. That was the one sentence that almost hurt. Almost. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "No, Jason. You loved what you thought you could take from me." The detective guided him toward the door. This time, he did not resist. Beatrice walked behind him with her chin raised, still pretending dignity belonged to her. Courtney followed last, sobbing into her hands. The courtroom doors closed behind them with a heavy final sound. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the judge looked at me. Her expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore, this court recognizes your full legal autonomy and directs law enforcement to provide protective support while criminal and civil matters proceed." I nodded, unable to speak immediately. Daniel placed one hand gently on my shoulder. Emily reached for my other hand. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to breathe fully, not shallow breaths, not controlled breaths, not the careful breathing of a woman pretending to be sedated. A real breath. Mine. After the hearing, Daniel escorted me outside through a side entrance to avoid reporters already gathering near the front steps. The cold Chicago air hit my face, sharp and clean. I stood there for a moment beneath the gray afternoon sky and realized I was not shaking. I had expected justice to feel explosive, like revenge, like victory. Instead, it felt quiet. It felt like standing on solid ground after days of being told the floor beneath me did not exist. Emily hugged me tightly before whispering, "The company is secure. Everyone's waiting for you when you're ready." I closed my eyes and let those words settle inside me. The company was secure. My freedom was secure. My mind was mine. My name was mine. Jason had tried to turn me into a patient, a liability, a signature, a problem to be managed. The court had seen exactly what I was. Competent, clear, alive. Daniel handed me a sealed folder. "There will be civil filings tomorrow. Asset recovery, damages, injunctions, protective orders. We have a long road ahead." I looked down at the folder, then back toward the courthouse doors where Jason had disappeared. "Good," I said quietly. "Let's make sure they never do this to anyone again." Daniel nodded. That was already in the draft. For the first time in days, I smiled. Not the weak smile I gave Jason. Not the hollow smile I wore for Beatrice. Not the polite smile expected from a woman trying to survive a room full of predators. A real smile. The war was not over. Trials, lawsuits, statements, board meetings, and public fallout still waited ahead. But the battlefield had changed forever. I was no longer locked in a bedroom pretending to be broken while monsters planned my future downstairs. I was standing outside a courthouse with my attorney, my executive team, and the truth on my side. They had wanted my money. They had wanted my company. They had wanted my silence. They had even wanted my freedom. Instead, they had handed me every weapon I needed to destroy them. And as I stepped into the waiting car, I finally understood something Jason never did. Power is not the ability to control another person. Real power is keeping your mind clear when everyone around you is trying to convince the world you have lost it. 1 year later, I stood beneath the glass entrance of the Melanie Whitmore Foundation while reporters crowded the sidewalk and television cameras pointed toward the stage prepared for the opening ceremony. The building behind me wasn't another corporate headquarters. It wasn't another technology company or another investment office. It was something far more meaningful. It existed because 1 year earlier the people I trusted most had almost convinced the world I was incapable of making decisions for myself. Above the entrance, carved into polished granite, were 7 simple words. Truth gives freedom to those who refuse fear. I looked at those words for a long moment before walking inside. 12 months earlier, I had entered another building believing I might lose my company, my reputation, my freedom, and even my identity. Today, I was opening a foundation dedicated to making sure nobody else would ever face the same nightmare alone. The audience rose to their feet as I entered the auditorium. Hundreds of people filled the room: lawyers, judges, business owners, journalists, elderly couples, women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Many had survived financial abuse themselves. Others had nearly lost everything to manipulative relatives. Some simply wanted to understand how easily trust could become a weapon. I smiled as Daniel Harrison walked onto the stage beside me. Emily Chen stood nearby with the executive team from Aegis Technologies. Every employee watching the live stream already knew one thing: this ceremony wasn't celebrating my victory. It was celebrating the survival of the truth. During the past 12 months, Aegis Technologies had experienced the strongest year in company history. Revenue reached record levels. Government contracts expanded internationally. Every employee received additional ownership shares because I never forgot who remained loyal while my life was collapsing. The board unanimously approved new governance rules, ensuring no future executive could ever gain unchecked authority over the company. No husband, no family member, no investor, no board chairman, nobody. The systems protecting Aegis Technologies became stronger than ever because betrayal had taught me something success never could. Trust is precious, but accountability is permanent. The criminal cases concluded 9 months after the conservatorship hearing. Jason accepted a plea agreement only after every attempt to suppress the recordings failed. The evidence left him with no other choice. His own voice had convicted him long before any jury could. Project Phoenix, the financial transfers, the emails, the pharmacy records, the surveillance footage, the secret payments to Dr. Carlisle. Every lie he told created another document proving the truth. He was sentenced to years in federal prison, permanently barred from holding executive authority over any regulated corporation, and ordered to pay millions of dollars in restitution, penalties, and civil damages. Every appeal was denied. Every motion failed. Every excuse collapsed beneath the weight of his own planning. Beatrice chose a different path. She refused every opportunity to admit responsibility. Even after hearing her own recorded voice played repeatedly during trial, she insisted she had only been protecting her family. The jury disagreed. She lost nearly everything she valued. Her charities removed her from every leadership position. Social clubs revoked her memberships. Longtime friends quietly disappeared from her life. The same woman who once believed reputation could never be taken away discovered that public trust disappears much faster than wealth. Courtney accepted responsibility earlier than anyone expected. She cooperated with investigators, admitted her role in the conspiracy, and testified honestly about everything she had witnessed. Her cooperation reduced her sentence, but it couldn't erase what she had done. Several months later, I received a handwritten letter from her. She didn't ask me for forgiveness. She didn't ask for another chance. She simply wrote, "I spent my entire life following whoever promised me the easiest future. I forgot how to become someone I could respect. I folded the letter, placed it inside a drawer, and never answered. Some people deserve forgiveness. Others simply deserve the opportunity to live with the consequences of their own choices." Dr. Carlisle voluntarily surrendered his medical license before disciplinary hearings were completed. Investigators later discovered that my case wasn't the only one involving questionable consulting payments and unethical medical recommendations. Several additional investigations followed. I never celebrated his downfall. I celebrated the fact that he would never again have the opportunity to destroy another patient's life. As the ceremony officially began, I stepped toward the microphone while the room slowly became silent. Looking across the audience, I saw faces filled with curiosity, hope, and quiet understanding. I took a slow breath before speaking. 1 year ago, I sat inside a courtroom while people I loved argued that I was no longer capable of making decisions for myself. The room became completely silent. They believed they could take my company because they first convinced themselves they could take my voice. I paused for a moment, before continuing. Many people believe money is the most valuable thing someone can steal. They're wrong. The most valuable thing anyone can steal is your confidence in your own mind. Once they convince you to doubt yourself, everything else becomes easier. Several people quietly nodded. I continued speaking without notes because every word came directly from experience. What saved me wasn't wealth. It wasn't influence. It wasn't luck. It was preparation. It was evidence. It was refusing to surrender my judgment simply because someone else insisted I should. The audience applauded, but I raised one hand gently until the room became quiet again. This foundation exists for one reason. Every woman deserves someone willing to believe the evidence before believing the performance. Every parent deserves protection from financial manipulation. Every older adult deserves legal support before someone else decides they know what's best. Nobody should ever have to fight alone simply because the people betraying them happen to be family. The applause lasted much longer this time. When the ceremony ended, dozens of women approached simply to shake my hand. Some hugged me without saying a word. Others quietly whispered that my story reminded them of their own. One elderly woman held my hands with tears in her eyes and said, "Because of your interview last month, I asked my attorney to review documents my nephew wanted me to sign. He was trying to transfer my house." I looked at her for several seconds before smiling. "I'm glad you trusted yourself." She nodded while wiping away tears. "You reminded me that kindness doesn't mean surrender." After everyone had left, I stepped outside alone and looked across the Chicago skyline glowing beneath the evening sun. My phone vibrated. "Daniel Harrison." I answered immediately. "Everything's finalized," he said. "The last civil judgment was entered this afternoon." I smiled. "How did it end?" Daniel laughed quietly. "Exactly the way you hoped." "Meaning?" "Every stolen dollar has been recovered. Every fraudulent transfer has been reversed. Every legal fee has been awarded. Every protective order has become permanent." He paused before adding one final sentence. "The appellate court also cited your case as guidance for future conservatorship fraud cases across the state." I closed my eyes for a moment, not because of the money, not because of the judgment, because somewhere in the future another woman standing inside another courtroom would receive justice a little faster because of everything I survived. Before hanging up, Daniel quietly said something I will never forget. "Jason believed history belonged to whoever controlled the paperwork." I smiled. "I remember." Daniel laughed softly. He was wrong. "History belongs to whoever tells the truth first and proves it." After ending the call, I remained standing outside the foundation as the sun slowly disappeared behind the skyline. I thought back to the woman lying in a hospital bed, convinced she had lost everything. She believed her life was ending. She had no idea it was only beginning. Jason tried to steal my company. He failed. He tried to steal my reputation. He failed. He tried to steal my freedom. He failed. Most importantly, he tried to convince me that I could no longer trust my own mind. He failed there too. Because the strongest people are not the ones who never experience betrayal. They are the ones who refuse to let betrayal redefine who they become. I didn't walk away with revenge. I walked away with something infinitely more valuable. My name, my dignity, my freedom, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that every lie eventually collapses beneath the weight of the truth. If my story leaves you with one lesson, let it be this: never allow someone else's manipulation to become your reality. Never mistake control for love. Never confuse silence with weakness, because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one collecting every piece of evidence while everyone else celebrates too early. They believed they were writing the final chapter of my life. In reality, they were only writing the opening chapter of their own downfall. And as I walked toward my car beneath the fading evening light, I smiled not because I had defeated them, but because after everything they tried to take from me, my future finally belonged to me again.